Welcome to We Are Women Unapologetically, the podcast that talks about the good, bad, ugly, and awesome. Careers, life transitions, confidence, and everything in between. Because shift happens, but you don't have to do it alone.
Hello, and welcome to We Are Women Unapologetically. My name is Jessica Cumming. Today, I am accompanied by Mary Wilcox Smith. She is a speaker and author with a background in entrepreneurship, leadership, and parenting. With an MBA from INSEAD, a top business school in France, and experience building businesses across 3 continents, her path later shifted through motherhood, including raising 4 daughters that were born in 5 years and navigating one child's complex medical needs. Today, her work explores how the small, high-pressure moments in family life shape resilience, confidence, and emotional well-being. Mary, thank you for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. Glad to be here.
It sounds like you have had quite the path to get here. 3 continents. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your journey and where you have gone in order to get to the podcast here today?
I'm going to tell this quick story about when a child came to me and I realized so much about myself. I was standing in the kitchen, knee deep in laundry and dishes, and my 8-year-old marched in and she said, "I'm quitting ballet." So I kind of went, "Wait, what? Why?" And completely deadpan, like she didn't even blink. She said, "Because you can't win at ballet." Standing there in these yellow rubber dish gloves, I thought, wow, somehow I have passed down my unconscious need for perfection without realizing it to this tiny human. That wasn't the start of everything, but it was this really interesting moment where I realized so much of what you talk about in this podcast, how much in life we're driven by the things that we put into our backpack when we're young, but then really importantly, as parents, we pass on to our children if we're not aware of them. So I start that because it's a fun story, but then it also can lead me into sort of how I ended up on these 3 continents. I had a classic kid do well in high school and college life. I went to high school, president of this, captain of that. I went to Bowdoin College, which I loved in Maine. And then I just had this urge to go do something different. And I think when I say perfectionism, if we back up a lot, we get to a lot of trauma in my life. There was significant stuff in my life. And so being different, being perfect, running away from feelings was a lot of what I did. Worked out great because my mother had been an Army brat. And she said, "Oh my gosh, these people coming up to me in the store and they can't believe I'm letting you go abroad." And she said, "But I lived in France, and as long as I could say bread and cheese, you're going to be fine." So I bought this one-way ticket to Europe and as a cousin in London I could stay with. And I ended up traveling around and then working in Switzerland as a cook. It was something that I had done younger. I was a cook. And in the Alps, because I was young and impetuous and thought I could do everything better than everyone else, I ended up starting my own business there, running ski holidays, which I look back as like some of the best time of my life. Because these people from England would come over, you'd provide everything for them. You'd pick them up at the airport, you'd provide skiing, you'd set them up, you'd provide meals. I had cooks and ski guides and whatever. I grew this business very young in another country.
How old were you when you started this business?
So I would have been 23.
So you had the entrepreneur spirit very young.
24, 25, to be fair. Yes. And as a younger child, my brother and I ran a horse show and made our money. My mother, it was one thing. She let me be that. I just took care of myself from very young, but it served a purpose. So I had that great experience. I could have stayed doing that, but I think there was probably this running away. There was a lot of stuff going on in my head. I applied to business school and I went to business school. And that's what brought me to New York. Long story short, married my husband from business school. He's a Canadian. He also came to the States. Fun fact, we are John and Mary Smith.
How funny.
When we moved to Argentina, not only were the police looking out for us because of our name, we moved to Argentina. My first 2 kids are Argentine, the first 2 girls. Second one was born with medical issues. And then we moved back. I started a business there with other expats. It was a website for expats. It was early days of website and doing that kind of thing. So then I did that and I came back to the States and I then had 2 more kids and a child with really quite serious medical issues. And so then I helped my husband start his business when he ultimately started a furniture business. So that's the three continents.
Let's kind of dissect those, right? You started off in England and you were living with Cousin Mary. Then what made you decide that you wanted to go to Switzerland?
I went to the UK because I did field hockey camps as a kid and had my cousins. I knew some people there. And I remember landing there and thinking it was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done because some guy spoke to me and I couldn't understand a word he said. Because, of course, that Cockney slang in the UK. But anyway, that was funny. So then I got a Euro pass and traveled for several months. Then I extended that travel. You could travel very cheaply in Greece and in Turkey. So I traveled for a long time. I went to Switzerland at one point, loved it. In those travels, I heard that they have these chalet holidays and you're called a chalet girl. You're in the Alps. So I found a small company and I cooked for them and they took me. And just it was an amazing experience because I was cooking, but then people would come and you'd ski with them all day. And then you do a 3-course meal at night. And there were other people doing it too. So that's how I ended up there.
Okay. Can you explain what a Eurorail is? Because we don't have that here in the US.
Because the train system is so good in Europe, you would get this pass that allowed you to get on and off the train anywhere. And so what would it enable you to do is you could be anywhere, meet someone and say, oh, let's go to Germany. We get on a train and go to Germany. It was a way of traveling around. And then youth hostels were very cheap at that time, but you could find cheap accommodation. And so it was a way to just travel around and meet new people and see a lot of Europe. I love the Alps. I felt the mountains and the hiking I loved.
Would you say that Switzerland would have been your favorite country in Europe?
I'm going to do a disservice to all my Swiss friends. Apology. I love Switzerland, but Norway's amazing. I lived in Switzerland, so I'm comfortable there. So Norway feels a little foreign, but the fjords in Norway, the people, love Norway.
That's one place that I haven't been, but I do know people that live there. So they will be very happy to hear that their country is your favorite.
I have my little troll from Norway because trolls are big.
Yeah, I have one from Sweden. Yep, I understand. What happened once you left Switzerland? How did you go from running a ski holiday to go to business school in France?
You're out there doing stuff, you're hearing things that other people are doing, right? And I think one of the things we bring all our own bag with us. And I've already mentioned this kind of running away thing, which I wouldn't have thought of it as running away because at that point in my life, I did a lot of really great, fun things. But there I was running this business. And I think I was always kind of living in the next step, right? Rather than thinking this is it, because it was amazing. You know what I mean? I could have done it for another 10 years. I had an Australian boyfriend. He ran it with me for a year. And then he was going to business school. And so then I put it in my head. To be very honest, I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. You know, it felt like people in a suit in a corporate job were somehow more important than I was. Right, which also is a shame. I was ahead of my time. Like people usually work into something like this afterwards, whereas I jumped into it young. So then I picked these 2 business schools. NCED is a top business school in the world, but you have to speak 3 languages. I spoke Spanish and French, and I applied to EMD first, which is a Swiss school. I didn't get into that, pulled myself together and got into NCED. NCED was an amazing experience. I'd give a shout out for it. NCED's over in France. So many different nationalities, everyone speaking several languages, really interesting people. It's an amazing experience. That's where I met my husband. And after NCED, when I wanted a real job that wasn't entrepreneurship, I didn't have a visa for it. So then I came back to the States and worked for American Express. And then when we moved to Argentina, I kept consulting for them for a while.
I'd like to know about you meeting a Canadian in France and then going back to the US.
At this point, I've lived abroad for at least 8 years, 7 years, right? And we didn't have phones like we do now. I called my mother every 3 months, right? So, and I loved being abroad. I became best friends with the 2 guys who ran the tiny little grocery store in my little Swiss village because my clients were all English, but that was a way for me to learn the language. So I really did immerse myself. I wanted to be a real part of it. And then when I went to business school, everyone's different nationalities. And so the Canadian actually felt quite close to me because we both spoke the same language and we're on the same continent. And then I had to come to the States. And I think one of John's best offers was in Chicago. So he went to Chicago and I went to New York. So the bigger decision was half a year later when he moved to New York. And then we took a job with his company to take us to Argentina.
I was curious to know, how long did you end up living in Switzerland? And then how long did you end up living in France?
Switzerland, I was there going back and forth from the UK. I want to say 7-ish years. And then, because I worked for another company for a few years, started my own company, did that for 4 or 5, then sold it. SIAD is a year course. I was in Fontainebleau, just south of Paris. I lived in a chateau. I was only there for a year. And the thing about INSEAD that's different than some of the business schools here is everyone's older. They tend to have worked for several years. So people had a really good sense of like, yeah, I need to work really hard, but this is also time off. This is a fun year. So it was really great for meeting people and getting to know people. In France, I was there for a year. And then I came home.
How long were you guys in New York before you ended up moving to Argentina?
So then he moved to New York. We got married. And his role in this bank, he's Dutch as well as Canadian. His job was actually as an expatriate. So by definition, you move every 2 to 3 years. His next posting was going to be in South America. And we chose between Brazil and Argentina. So then we chose Buenos Aires. We went to Buenos Aires, and that's why we lived in Argentina.
What made you guys choose between the two? I think that would be a tough decision.
I'm not sure I remember exactly why. In Brazil, they speak Portuguese, right? And in Argentina, they speak Spanish. That might have been a big piece of it. I improved my Spanish while I was there, but we both already had some Spanish. So that might have been a large piece of it. And he may have had to say in that choice too, but I think probably the Spanish was a piece of it.
I know that Portuguese and Spanish are similar, obviously not identical. So how long were you guys in Argentina? I know that you mentioned that you started your family down there. It's great to hear how much you've already traveled at this point.
I know I was really lucky. We had our first 2 girls there, and the second one, they were born quite close together. They were 15 months apart. And the second one was born with very serious medical issues. And she was the sickest one in the NICU. She was the heaviest one. She was 8 pounds, but she was the sickest one. Had to be intubated. She was very sick. And so right around that time, we were supposed to go to Aruba. That was supposed to be our next posting. Some company called him about a job. And he started to look into it. And then Aruba was an amazing option. And our stuff was literally en route to Aruba in canisters. We had this offer up here outside of DC with Nextel. And we decided it made more sense to be near a major medical center. So we came to DC. And that's how we ended up in DC. I'm a New Englander. I kind of miss New England, to be honest.
That had to be a very selfless decision to do that for your child.
When you have things like that happen, it's hardly time to think. Yeah, because I wasn't necessarily ready to come back to the States if I didn't have to. I love living abroad. And so we haven't really done it since, really.
That was going to be one of my questions. Have you found the opportunity to live abroad since?
No, and partially because my child did require a lot. She's fine now. She still has lung issues, but because of that, there was a lot going on. And I think if I had had 4 healthy kids, it would have been easier to make that kind of decision. We'll probably move at some point. We did travel. We've traveled abroad, but not moved.
I want to make sure that your other children are mentioned in here too, because you mentioned that you had 4 that were born in 5 years, right? The first 2 were in Argentina. Tell me about your other 2 and how old are they now?
When we came back here, Carolina was sort of okay. We didn't know the extent of her sickness at that point, even though she'd been very sick in the hospital in the NICU. But when we came back here, she then in the fall got quite sick and we ended up being in the hospital for probably 2 months almost. I literally came home at Christmas. We had to be in the hospital and got pregnant. I hadn't really thought that through because now we had one that was a lot of work and then I had another one coming. And so little Charlotte came. And I remember when she ate at 6 months and it was so easy for her, I remember crying because there's a lot of struggle with Catalina. She had a lot of issues. Charming child, but I couldn't have kids forever. And I sort of thought, do I want a 4th? You got to make the decision. I'm done if you're done. And so then we were blessed with a 4th, Sophie. And the youngest, Sophie, just graduated last May from college. The 3 others are out. And we have one living at home, the youngest. She's working. The other 3 all are out. One's in Sydney, Australia. One's in New York. And one is in Boston.
You have definitely put the travel bug into them as well, with them being all located in different places. It's great to hear that they're all doing well. That has to be quite the transition from four girls to now being empty nesters, kind of with one still there, but I'm sure it's definitely more like having a roommate now than having a daughter sometimes.
I think that can be a really big transition and bigger for some than others. I remember when my eldest went to Berkeley, I remember parents literally saying, like, how can you do that? How can you let her go so far away? I sort of felt like a bad parent. It takes me back to my mother in the grocery store where the woman was asking her, how can you let your child go to Europe on her own? We're supposed to teach them to fly. And it is hard. I'd do anything to go back and have a second chance. I started my business a little before COVID when I had one at home. I've dived into that. So while it's changed and I miss the kids and it's different, I'm still a parent in the 21st century. It's not like they're gone and forgotten. You're still pretty involved. I have something that I've thrown myself into. It would be a lot harder if I didn't, because I was someone who, even though I worked, I probably lived through them a little bit too much. You know what I mean? I was there for them a lot. And I think that transition is a really big one for some parents. That's why it's
That's
great
like,
to be a working mom, I think.
what advice would you have to women that are looking at letting their children go for the first time, whether it be somewhere in high school as an exchange student or going across the country for college, whatever it may be?
Oh, I mean, for me, it's such a great experience, especially for Americans, right? You learn so much in another culture. My personal opinion on experiences. I think the second thing I would say is this started in the 90s when we used to see the milk cartons with the kid was missing. The likelihood of that happening this day and age is so much lower. I know there's human trafficking. I take all of that very seriously. But in general, it's lower if you're on top of your kids and you're telling them about things. But parents are very scared, right? Bus stops, how many cars do you see at bus stops? And so from a parenting perspective, that protectiveness is hard on the kids. And when we're anxious as parents, they feel that. You know the chicken story? So we love animals. Did you say you have chickens?
No, I don't have chickens. My HOA will not allow chickens.
So we got chickens because we have a big enough yard. We love this kind of thing. So we had more than one fox attack, even though we protected them. What chickens will do is they'll play dead. That's what they're fight, flight, or freeze. They freeze. They play dead. And I've seen a chicken survive because of that, because the animal thinks they're dead. But then they don't get up until the head chicken, you all know there's a pecking order of chickens, until that head chicken stands up. And why is that? Because when the head chicken sort of says, it's okay, everyone knows it's okay. And living in this world of anxiety, which is even worse now. You just turn on the news and I'm stressed, right? Kids feed off of us, even if we're saying something else. If we're scared to let them go somewhere else, they feel that. And that creates anxiety. And so be aware that if you're nervous of that, that maybe they don't have to be, or maybe they can have a different experience. And number one, that it's a good experience. Number two, be aware of it being, is it your story or their story that's keeping or not keeping them from going? And the third, that was just sort of that anxious piece of us hanging on too much.
A lot of times it is difficult for parents to allow their children to go. And sometimes it is past traumas that we carry with us. Do you see a correlation between the traumas that we experience as children that we are then passing down?
First and foremost, that's why I mentioned my daughter saying, like, I want to quit ballet. You can't win. That's clearly not something I'm teaching her, but I'm presumably modeling it and oozing it somehow, right? Even though I wasn't running around with a stick making them do well, it just comes out, right? Well, I guess the big learning for me, and I did therapy pretty young because I knew something was just off. I never quite knew what it was. I grew up with mental health in my family, intergenerational trauma. People taking their lives goes back several generations, but my father took his life when I was 12. I've just written a piece on mental health. It's sort of my first foray in where I'm sort of saying, we got to really start to look at ourselves if we're going to talk about mental health in teens and young adults. because it's not just about the 1-800 lines to help them and to catch it. Like, a lot of it comes from us. And I am one of those people, which is why I can talk about it. One book that I wrote, a chapter in it is like, I learned my father had taken his life and I went and got a cookie. So my way of dealing with a lot of crap in my house, there was also abuse in my house, was to go do well at school. I had 5 siblings. I dealt with it differently. But for me, it was going and being perfect. It was being the top. If I could win at something, I was going to win at it. And so that was my way of coping. And those coping mechanisms, they feel like survival when we're young. And you talk about this all the time in your podcast. Until you unpack that, that's with you. So a lot of times when I'd speak, I talk about this invisible backpack that we have, that we carry around with us. We need to unpack that. And until we unpack it, it drives a lot of us. My sister did also take her life. I found her. I was at business school and she was in France. And, that was a big deal. There was a lot of guilt there. There was a lot of confusion, obviously. And the abuse piece, I never really dealt with. I just thought, whatever. From the outside, I was doing and succeeding and doing fine. And I'm really blessed with a lot. I'm blessed with a strong personality. So I recognize that we're not talking about a depression where I was isolated all the time. I had a lot of really good experiences, whereas sometimes people don't have that. So I had a bit of both. You won't maybe notice it from the outside. So then I went into parenting thinking, because you asked about, see if it's your anxiety. Is it your story or theirs that's keeping you? And I went into parenting thinking sort of like, I've got this. I left that dysfunction behind. I'm bright. My kids aren't going to have chocolate on their t-shirts or scream in restaurants. I'm going to be fine. And it was fine. Even with one with medical issues, there were 4 girls, pretty good kids. It was okay for a handful of years. And then we went into what I call my dark years. And it was very hard for my second child because the other 3 were these natural athletes. They all went off and played D1 and D3 sports, and they were captains. And their life looked and felt a little more like mine had, even though they all have their own stuff. But from the outside, but they had the good experience that I'm talking about. Like when you have a lot of crap going on, it's nice to feed yourself with some winning, but then you get older and you can't win at everything anymore, and life becomes harder. That's the problem. When we hit what I call the dark years, and I couldn't stop behaviors because I had never learned how to parent. I not only grew up in dysfunction, but I was this perfect child. My mother basically told me, it was complete hands off because I was doing okay. But trauma isn't measured by what happens on the outside. Trauma is measured by what you were able to handle as a little child. So your trauma can be, you grew up in Northern Ireland and there was a war, or it can be, I was second and the older brother was a star tennis player and my parents never paid attention to me and I couldn't figure out why they didn't love me. And those 2 traumas might look different, but the point of the trauma is that it gets stored in your body.
I love that because when people think trauma, they think big things. They think the big things that happen. And if it wasn't automatically able, very quickly to point out that it wasn't trauma. But I do like the way that you say that it's these little things that add up. I know that in the podcast, I've talked about some of my past traumas and some of the different things that have happened to me. I get that completely because my stuff wasn't all big, but it's the things that you carry with you. It's the things that you either deal with or you don't. I heard you say that when it came to the abuse that happened in your household, it was something you didn't deal with. I don't want to put words into your mouth. If you just brush it off and don't deal with it, did there ever become a point in time where you did decide to face it head on, or is it something that you decided not to?
So I did something called the Hoffman Institute. You go, it's a week-long program. It was when I was really down. I was on vacation with my family. My brother was like, well, I think things happened to me as a child that maybe my mother hadn't really told me about. He kind of raised it. And he's like, you got to deal with this stuff and you got to talk to her about it. Around that time, I decided to go do this week-long program because I was just very down and I had little kids. I think they were between, 4 and 8. And it's a great program because it takes you through, your parent relationship is so critical to your well-being and your childhood. And I remember this woman saying, because you get one therapist as well who's kind of in charge of you. And I remember her saying to me, the most startling thing about your application is that you talk about having this amazing childhood and how much you were given, and you rode horses and you got opportunities and you had this family and you loved all these things. And then you talk about this dysfunction. And she said the juxtaposition of those things is really remarkable for me. I don't often see that. So I think in some ways I'm my own worst enemy because I can just get by well enough. So I have tried to deal with it. That program opened a lot to me. That was really the first time that came out. I got asked a question, and when I answered it, the abuse came up, and it had never really come up before. If I'm going to be totally honest, I am always working on it, but I'm not someone who can say, oh yeah, I did my 11 years of therapy and I figured it out, because I am still working out. And I would say I'm still sabotaged in my business. I still see ways that my perfectionism gets in the way. I'm a mix. Parenting can help people unlock some of that stuff, because when you are parenting, you can't help but to have that stuff come up. If you don't want to go do this overhaul and go sit in therapy, you can start practicing your way into better parenting. It's what I call my micro steps. And then as you do that, if you're open to it, things will come up. And you'll start to at least have the awareness around them, which will then take you in the direction you want. I don't have the perfect black and white answer for you, so I'm a little bit of both. There are days when I think, maybe I just go to my grave with some of this crap, you know what I mean? But I also know from all the reading I do that you just got to keep fighting it back. You got to keep fighting back, right?
Before it was brought up by your mom and your brother, was it something that you knew had happened?
I knew, but I think my sister suffered worse than me, clearly. I think my mother, to survive, because she also had an abusive alcoholic, brilliant lawyer as a husband, lived in the big white house on the hill. He played polo, good sense of humor, this brilliant person who theoretically had it all together, who was a nightmare also. So I would think for her to survive, and that she's passed away now, but worked very hard on herself. But when we were little, she had 5 of us, right? She had to tell herself, I think, it's okay, they'll be fine. So it didn't probably help me because you're not in a very safe space. So you asked me, did I know? Yes. But then there was a piece of me that was I wasn't suffering enough for anyone else to worry about me. I was very successful on the outside. There are worse versions of it. Therefore, mine wasn't. I still would probably say mine wasn't as bad. I went to a suicide group 8 or 10 years ago, and I sat there and I was like, oh, that's awful. That's terrible. Oh my gosh, how have you gotten through that? People were like, Mary, your story's awful.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that that is very personal, and abuse is something that, regardless of how small or significant it may seem, none of it is right. None of it should be accepted. But to your point too, I know that everyone does try to deal with the trauma differently. Looking back, do you ever wish that you would have addressed your past traumas or done anything differently?
Well, I'm still doing it. I wish I knew more about what I know today. The regret I have is around my children, which is why I do what I do. Because I firmly believe that the parent is the change agent. And kids come with their own stuff. There's no question. My kids, in a lot of ways, are very lucky, right? There's a lot of opportunity. But they also have this intergenerational crap. My husband, less so on his side. But I'm irritated that I had therapists and sent, especially, one of them, but various of them, to therapy. And I'm really irritated no one made it more clear to me, even though I was there all the time, right? the impact I had. It's like with my one with mental issues, she needed to hear, this is awful. It was very complicated. I had 3 kids who were doing very well and one who was having a harder time. I wish I knew more before I had kids. 100%. I'm frustrated with how I am sometimes. It irritates me because I hold myself back because of my crap. And that's too bad, right? No one wants to hold himself back.
You also mentioned that your father and sister both passed away from suicide. Can
Yes.
you tell me the impact that it had on you losing your father, but also losing your sister in the same manner?
It's kind of my life. I went and got a cookie. That is how I dealt with it. I got in trouble when I was 13, junior high. There was some gym teacher that we didn't like, and we were at some practice on the weekend, and 2 other girls and I went and wrote on her door. And I actually didn't do the worst thing. There was a big F word in the middle of the door. I actually didn't do that. Just everyone out there, if you're listening, it wasn't me. And I etched something on the side. Come Monday morning, they called me to the office. And I wasn't a troublemaker. I was a bright kid. I was a good kid. I was loud. My last name was Wilcox. So I'd start in the back of the room. By the end of the class, I'd be in the front of the room because I was loud and chatty. I was also the president. I liked people and people liked me. But I don't think my mother even spoke to me about it. I am sure they called my mother. But my mother is a very good person and an amazing woman. And she lost her husband and her eldest. That's pretty awful. And survived that. You know what I mean? It's pretty crazy. Got remarried at 80, happiest she's ever been, and died a few years later because of cancer. But I really had the best 2 years of her life, I think. But she couldn't even talk to me about it. I was this perfect kid, right? I remember that feeling that these teachers who I adored, almost brings tears to my eyes, and I looked up to, were so disappointed in me. That was a terrible feeling. I'm having tears. I'm not allowed to cry in a podcast.
You are.
So
It's
drink of
okay.
water.
You wouldn't be the first one that has had a couple of tears. So okay.
So that's because I got A's. I did the right thing, but I was rude sometimes. I remember doing some mean things to other kids with other girls, and I really didn't like that. Inside, I didn't like that. And then I remember thinking, so I got in trouble, whatever. I can't even remember the big trouble, but the biggest thing for me was like, I looked at these teachers and said, it wasn't me. And then it was, right? But I wanted so badly for it not to be me. Now they all knew that I just lost my dad, right? So they had the pieces put together better than I did. But I remember thinking, never again. So I was starting college the next year, and so I could restart. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to be a good kid. I'm going to do the right thing. Is that what drove my perfectionism? I have no idea. I mean, I am a leader. I'm loud. Probably not even a leader. I'm just loud. I become the captain. I become the president. I did well in high school. From the outside, I was a perfectly model student, but that shame of someone being really disappointed was a lot. If you ask how it impacted me, that's probably how it impacted me. Because my sister had mental breakdowns. My other brother got into drugs, even though he was at a private school. So he got in trouble. Another brother had something else. We all deal with it different ways. My sister, I was older. I was at business school. Probably didn't deal with it quite enough. Probably still haven't dealt with it quite enough. Her husband died. She had a little child and she took her life. And then how the Algerians tried to get my nephew, but then we got him. Crazy story.
Sounds like you have had quite a life filled with different stories, ups and downs.
And then I had kids.
Yeah, definitely a roller coaster of emotions and different scenarios for sure. We've talked about a lot so far, a lot of the trauma, a lot of loss, a lot of happy times as well. Similar to when you said that you went to Hawthorne for that week, there was a lot of great times, but there was a lot of dysfunction as well.
Yeah.
I did hear you mention that your mom ended up passing away from cancer. Can you tell me how that impacted you? Was it something that you dealt with differently at all, being at a different age?
So that's a good question. Those were some of my dark years. They were just hard years. So there was a lot going on. And so by definition, as someone who doesn't stop in order not to feel. It's probably why I had 4 children, right? I keep moving. I recognize that's a strategy. I still work on that. For my mom, our relationship young was odd. She knew some things and didn't do anything about it. So as a child, I must have somewhere known that. That was hard. So then I didn't need her. I think that was hard for her too. I think we got closer as she was older. And given how much I know now, I'd love to have that relationship with her now, obviously. She did a lot of hard work. This is not a selfish person. She did a lot of work, but we're all damaged, right? And then she lost her eldest daughter. And for losing her and how I dealt with it, the short answer is I kept moving because that's what I do. I was particularly sad for her because I do think she was maybe the happiest she had ever been, marrying this guy who was wonderful in their 80s. And one thing that I did do, which I am very happy that I did, is when I found out, I called her doctor to get more information. And the story I was getting from her was different. It was like, no, she's got stage 4. This is pretty serious. And she didn't want it to be real. And so when I realized that, I said to her, I think you and George ought to get married. And she was like, no, no, no. And I said, I think you ought to get married and we need to have a big event. And so we had all the family. We all went and had 2 or 3 days and they got married. So we did have this amazing event, which was really nice. And she was very much there for that. As I'm watching my friends and my mother-in-law get older, both of my parents died when they were right at the end. My mother wasn't, but up until the last month, she's pretty lucid in there. And so in some ways, I feel blessed. I'm happy for her. I wish she'd had another 4 years. How did I deal with it? I don't know. To my kids about all this stuff, I've told them everything because I don't want it to sneak up on them. Talk about my relationships, what happened in my life, so they know. Because intergenerational trauma happens without us knowing.
Intergenerational trauma is something that we all experience, but we've talked about it a lot in this podcast.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, in your words, what the actual definition of intergenerational trauma is?
Okay, so I would fail this test, just to be honest. I've
You don't
studied
have
a
to tell me.
lot.
If
No,
you
no,
would
no. I will
rather
tell you
not
what
say.
I think.
Okay.
I've studied a lot of neuroscience, but I don't have the definition off the top of my head. But to me, what it means is that we are passing down probably in our genes, right? I don't think we still know how much of suicide is genes versus being really low. I don't think everyone's capable of taking their life. It goes against your very basic survival need. But I think intergenerational trauma to me, it means it gets passed on, even if the trauma hasn't happened to that person, just because we've lived it. And therefore we're modeling that. So my father in particular not having boundaries and my mother not being able to say no to me because she just wanted to be hands off because I was basically this perfect child. That's what I learned. I have a very good husband who's a very good person, and this would never happen. But I still brought that with me just in how I behave. Whereas I hoped I was marrying this guy with no anxiety and depression, and therefore my kids would have none. But they're modeling, and what our face looks like and what we feel like is so much more than the words that come out of our mouth, although the words are important. So to me, intergenerational trauma is the stuff that's happening, some of which we can do something about, but we don't have to have it happening to us today for it to get passed on.
For anyone out there that's looking to break the quote unquote intergenerational curse, what advice would you give them?
Have some kind of support where you're being heard and you're starting to become aware of what I call your parent traps that are in your backpack. So that's number one, because I am sort of on the side of the child now, right? I'm trying to be part of that mental health movement that says, how do we reduce this, especially in girls, but in teens and young adults? If you're a parent, that's what I would say, because they're your best teachers. Because the way they're acting and what they're doing is the information about you. Right? So there's so much value there. I know everyone can't afford one-on-one, but there's lots of ways to get support, right? There's lots of ways. And then you said to break out of that trap. And I guess the second I might say, and remember, I wouldn't comment, I'm not like, oh, I'm healed. Let me tell you how I did it. I think is probably some acceptance, because all the stuff we read, everything we read, and I hate it because I would rather be told I have to run a marathon, is that it starts with liking yourself. And I hate to give that advice because it is so much harder than getting up at 5 o'clock to go to my hot yoga class. I'd rather have to go to hot yoga for the rest of my life. Do you know what I mean? It's hard. But they all say that, right?
How does this, because I know that we've talked about this, so I think this is a great place to transition. Can you tell me how everything that happened to you with your trauma, with your travels, everything that you have done, parenting, all of it, has led you into the business that you're in and what you're doing today?
A lot of people who grow up with trauma end up thinking they want to go into psychology. I wanted to go into that. I went to Bowdoin College. The career help was terrible. It's a top college in the flipping country. And I remember being like, I'm bored in Social 1 and Psych 101. I want to take harder courses. And so then I completely missed the boat. Anyways, all fine. So I've always had a piece of me that would have enjoyed that. I've done so much therapy that in doing the therapy, I'm learning about me. And I always thought to myself, if we could just do for us what we do for kids. Well, of course, Dan Siegel had been doing it for 15 years, but I thought it was my idea. So I was like, I should coach parents on how to do that better. So then I went and got my coaching degree a few years later. But my first thought was, oh, I have to have my own framework, which you don't. You can just go get a coaching degree and coach. But then I thought, if I could have had 7 different habits, what would they be? The ability to say no, the ability to let my kids struggle. So ability to say no is boundaries, understanding safety and connection, the ability to just listen and validate instead of always pontificating. So I came up with these 6 or 7 things. And then I started writing these micro steps. And I was like, the brain science explains it so well. I always used to think, safety? What are people talking about? And I was like, what do we call it safety? Like, I got a roof over my head. I drive them to school. Nothing's going to happen to them. Like, safety is so different. And now more and more people understand it. But I wish I had understood those things. I thought I want to do it in a bite-sized way. I was frenetic. I didn't have the time. So my first thing was to build these little micro moments. What does it look like? What's happening in the brain? And why does responding differently build connection and build resilience? I started writing those, and someone was like, why don't you turn those into a book? And I was like, oh, yeah. So that's how I like to teach. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to get a coaching degree. And that's really how I got into it.
Tell me more about this book that you have written. What's the name of it? Where can people find it and learn more about you or connect with you?
The book is called The Microstep Method for the Overwhelmed Parent, Mary Wilcox Smith. And 40 or so of these little moments where I show you what happened and then I explain what happened. I added scripts because the feedback was, we love when you give us scripts. And I always laughed at scripts. So I was like, of course I know better. I don't need someone to tell me how to talk. But I wish I'd listened, because the script is the way you practice yourself in. You just try it and you watch what happens. And I give a little bit of my story before each chapter. I explain why it's important and what happened to me. So that's how the book works. It's very easy to find on Amazon. If you go to my website, Mary Smith Parent Coach or Mary Wilcox Smith, there's a page on the book and it takes you there. It tells you about the book, shows you what's in it. I wrote it probably thinking of up to 13 or 14, but it's really for all ages. There's just stuff to learn in it that's good. And it's a pick up, put down book. It's very easy. And it's also an Audible. It's my voice. I recorded it. In terms of where you can reach me, I'm on the platforms. I'm on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. I do a lot on there because that's where my speaking business being a little bit more on there, although I connect with parents there too, especially working parents. And my products are on my website. There's one-on-one stuff. And there's a one-off that I call Find Your Next Microstep, which because it's an hour and a half deep dive and you get a follow-up. We pick the one thing that's bothering you the most because you can't fix it all and it's not an overhaul. Fix one small thing at a time and you'll feel better and they'll feel better. So that's what I do. And I have this new thing and it's cheap. It's $25 a month, but I launched it because people sometimes just want to ask a question. And so it's show up once a week and I throw up in office hours. And if you have a question, you show up and you ask it and I won't let the group get too big. I'll open a second one. But it's my way of saying, I'm not going to provide you with all kinds of stuff to read, but you can show up and ask a question and get it answered. I think that's a good way of supporting the frenetic craziness of it at the moment.
Definitely cheaper than a therapist, I can tell you that from experience. Mary, thank you so much for joining me today. I know that we have unpacked a lot from the backpacks of not only yourself, but also the backpacks of parents and some of the things that they're having to go through. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really had a delightful conversation. I would have liked to hear more about you, but I can hear most of that on your podcast, I guess.
I did see a lot of parallels in some of the things that you talked about in regards to the perfectionism and not wanting to disappoint people. So a lot of what you were saying did resonate with me. We can definitely have another conversation another time. For all of the listeners and watchers out there, I want to thank you for joining us today. If you would like to get a hold of Mary or connect with her, we'll be sure to have her information in the show notes. If you are just looking for 10 minutes of clarity to help clear your head, I highly encourage you to download Clarity in 10. That will also be on the show notes or connect with me. If this resonated with you and or you know someone that needs to hear this message, please share it with a friend, subscribe so you never miss an episode. And until next week, stay fierce, stay bold, but most importantly, stay unapologetically you.